Welcome to For the Church, a podcast for the flock of Zion Presbyterian Church in Columbia, Tennessee. We want to help you think biblically about everyday matters. Zion Church exists to join Jesus and his mission to reach people with the gospel and then to equip his people to worship and serve. I'm your host, Keaton and Paul, and joining me is my conversation partner and co-host, Seth Scruggs. So we're in this series of For the Church that we're entitling The Church. And what we're doing is looking kind of broad camera angle, the church generally throughout time, sort of church history adjacent, and narrowing our scope further and further in to this particular church. Last time we looked in maybe the broadest brushed painting ever, if you can even call it that, the Reformed and Presbyterian tradition. Today, we're going to look at the denomination for which we belong, the PCA, or the Presbyterian Church in America. But before we get there, hey Seth, how are you?
I am good.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Nice.
that's what I got.
Oh, okay. Well, that didn't take long. Well, anyway.
I feel like I finally have some things to contribute to the conversation.
Oh.
Like so much of the last few episodes have been so church history focused, which is so in your bag, that I'm like, I don't really have anything to say, but like I know a little bit about the PCA.
Okay.
I know a little bit about Zion.
Okay.
So I feel I
Yeah.
might actually have something to say now.
This is good. And
Jackson, Mississippi. We can talk about that. I live there.
Oh, man. Jackson, Mississippi. What a place. What a place. Well, anyway, so let's get started then.
Yeah.
This story goes back a long ways. We're not going to rehearse all of it, but the story of the PCA actually starts with the old Southern Presbyterian Church. Now, if you'll remember from last episode, there was a variety of Presbyterian brands and even denominations in America with different flavors and even different denominations. But there's a huge split primarily between the Northern and Southern Presbyterian churches. In and around the Civil War, they remain split for a very long time. And the history of the PCA, the Presbyterian Church in America, begins in the old Southern Presbyterian Church. So, the old Southern Presbyterian Church had a variety of things that kind of made it a little bit unique and maybe even differentiated it, more broadly speaking, from Northern Presbyterian Church and even what I would call quintessential American Presbyterianism. Southern Presbyterianism honestly preserved a lot of the Scottish flavor that it brought. Many of the people who were bringing Presbyterianism into the southern United States in the colonial era and then on up even into the 1800s had very close connections to Scottish Presbyterianism. And so a lot of the posture and the way that they did Presbyterianism had a little bit more of that Scottish bent, but it's Scottish bent with sawmill gravy on it, if you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And so you can kind of see this demonstrated a lot of the ways in which the old seminaries operated. There were two primary seminaries for the Southern Presbyterian Church throughout the 1800s, and that is Old Columbia Theological Seminary. Columbia Theological Seminary, originally founded in the 1800s in Columbia, South Carolina. It always had a history in Old Columbia of strong preachers, and very bold, even at times prophetic preaching. And so there was an emphasis almost, they had a high view of Scripture and theology, deep and rich learning. But the preaching was so focused, especially in the early days of Old Columbia. Eventually it'll move. Today, Old Columbia still exists, just not in Columbia, South Carolina. It's in Decatur, Georgia now. But that was one. The second one was Union Theological Seminary. Union Seminary, if I can remember correctly, was in and still is somewhere close to Richmond, Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. And historically, kind of the slight flavor difference from Old Columbia, there tended to be more of a philosophical, theological push with certain professors that really, kind of drove the ship in the Southern Presbyterian Church throughout the 1800s, primarily in Union Theological Seminary. One such, Robert Louis Dabney, who, I think is a crystal clear thinker, holds deeply to the Presbyterian tradition. He got a lot of stuff wrong, and when he went wrong, he went real wrong. His stuff on slavery and race, I think, is absolutely awful. It's terrible. But his work on systematic theology was honestly pretty good. Anyway, so those were two sort of bastions of Old Southern Presbyterianism, Old Columbia and Old Union. And so there were some Southern Presbyterian ministers who would go up to Princeton. There's another rabbit trail that we could run. Some really wonderful African American Presbyterians who were raised in the South, Francis Grimke being one of them, went to Princeton because the Southern were segregated. But don't have time. All right. Nonetheless, Southern Presbyterianism, back to that. Old Columbia, Old Union were convictionally reformed. They held to the Westminster Standards. They taught the Westminster Standards alongside either Calvin's Institutes or Francis Turretin's work. So these guys are reformed. They're real reformed. Throughout the whole, really, of the 1800s, even on into the 1900s. Now, one of the early kind of encroachments of some of that more kind of European skepticism, theological liberalism, stemming again from the German university system, takes place honestly originally in Old Columbia, with none other than Woodrow Wilson. Yes, the president, old Woodrow Wilson's uncle, Woodrow Wilson, who, again, president of the United States. His father was a Southern Presbyterian minister. Woodrow Wilson, actually, as it were, fun fact, is at least in some sense, credentially, the most educated president in American history. He's the only president who had an earned PhD. Princeton Seminary, before he was the president of America, he was the president of Princeton. So that's your fun bit of trivia for the day. But anyway, old Woodrow's uncle starts to say, let's kind of let's play around a little bit with some of this German liberalism. Primarily, let's ask some questions about historical Adam. And so that begins to stir up a pot, but largely, again, how Southerners do. Well, we're not going to talk about that, at least in public. We'll talk about it in smoke-filled rooms where nobody else is, and probably say things that we wouldn't want others to repeat. Again, Old South. And so that takes place. And there's some theological liberalism that begins to encroach, especially by mid-century. By the time you get to the 1940s and 1950s, the seminaries are beginning to have some concern with many of the ruling elders. This is another kind of differentiation between the Southern Presbyterian Church and the Northern Presbyterian Church. The Northern Presbyterian Church believes in a 3-office system. That is, they believe in deacons, elders, and ministers. The Southern Presbyterian Church holds to a 2-office system, deacon and elder, elder is one office, but there's a slight differentiation of function in the eldership. You have ruling elders and you have teaching elders, nonetheless. And particularly amongst the ruling elders, there's a kind of growing concern of the ministerial training at these flagship seminaries of like, hey, we got guys coming in who are kind of saying stuff that's a little weird. And especially by the time you get to the 1940s and 50s, you have the development of neo-orthodoxy, the work of guys like Karl Barth and Emil Brunner, if I got his name right, Brunner, who are saying things that you're like, like you're saying the right words, but you're saying them in kind of a weird order. And there's something about it that's like, I don't know. There's a part of me says, yeah, but other part of me says, I don't know about that. Increasing in the Southern Presbyterian Church. The Northern Presbyterian Church by this point had its own problems. There was the splits, the development of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. That's long happened in the Northern, by decades, Presbyterian Church. But by the time you get to the 40s and the 50s, you have issues of how are our ministers being trained. The guy in the pulpit, can we trust that guy's going to get up there and honestly not just lead us astray? Like, can we trust that? And increasingly, the general posture within the Southern Presbyterian Church was honestly no. And so there are some who grow concern in the Southern Presbyterian Church. And so there's a concerted effort amongst Southern Presbyterians to have a more or less, quote unquote, conservative resurgence, to recoin a term. And so this is done through developments like a couple different magazines, in fact, that are written primarily from a conservative perspective that will do book reviews, have scholarly articles written in them, more or less of concerned Presbyterians, but also vocal conservative ruling elders in the Southern Presbyterian Church who are willing to stand up and say, hey, I think this is wrong. One of the leaders of this is actually Billy Graham's father-in-law. Nobody thinks Billy Graham and are like, oh, yeah, obviously Presbyterian. Billy Graham was raised in the ARP, the Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church, and his father-in-law was a lifelong PCUS ruling elder, very committed ruling elder. There's a building at the old RTS Jackson campus named after him. Very influential. But as this movement begins to progress, and the concern continues to arise of we're struggling to find guys who we can trust coming out of Old Columbia or Old Union. We're honestly having to like tell our guys, listen, like we're gonna have to send you up north to go to seminary. We have to send you to Westminster now, which had been operating by that point since 1929. We got to send you to Westminster to get trained. But that's a lot. That's a big ask for a guy to uproot from the South, go up to Philadelphia, be trained, and then come back. And what they found was they were sending guys up there and they were just staying. And so this group of conservatives got together and met at some point together in a hotel in Memphis in the early 1960s. And they got together and began to pray in discerning the Lord's will of how it is to remedy the issue of we can't trust the guys that are coming out of these seminaries, and to try to discern the Lord's will, particularly if it was the Lord's will to start a new seminary. And so eventually, in 1965, a group from that more or less prayer meeting in a hotel in Memphis purchased property in Jackson, Mississippi on a horse farm, had a large white house sitting on it, and they purchased it with the intention of starting a new seminary to train Southern Presbyterian ministers that would eventually be called Reformed Theological Seminary.
Do you know anything else about that?
I know a few things. In fact, I've stayed in that White House, which I don't know if it's still there. The campus actually isn't there. So my years at RTS Jackson, which is where I went, the flagship RTS school, which I will claim, and I think I have valid reasons to say, is really one of the main starting points to the Presbyterian Church in America. I'm just saying. It's no longer there at that campus. It's at a different place in Jackson, Mississippi. But all of my years were there on the original campus, and it was beautiful, wonderful, loved it. It was a great time. But from there, they start this new seminary. It's taught by conservative Southern Presbyterian ministers, many of which had actually been trained both at the old Southern flagship seminaries and Westminster. One particular professor who was heavily influential throughout those early years was a guy by the name of Morton Smith. And he actually lived a very long life and passed away not that long ago. Well, maybe 2017. So I guess that was almost 10 years ago, but that doesn't seem like that long ago. Anyway, he was professor, I believe, of systematic theology, firm conservative. And so there are guys getting trained at this conservative Southern Presbyterian seminary that doesn't have denominational oversight. That was one of their kind of key proponents. If we hand this over to the denomination, then they're the ones that are bringing in the faculty for Columbia and Union, and they keep getting these theological liberals. We're going to have an independent seminary, and we're going to staff it ourselves, and they have to hold to these kind of core convictions within the Reformed standards. And if they don't, they can't work here. And so they keep pulling these guys, but they keep finding out, they would train these guys, and they were high caliber guys. But the presbyteries would go, well, you didn't go to Columbia or you didn't go to Union. Sorry, and so they were having a hard time finding churches. And all the while, the denomination continues to grow more and more liberal. And there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there was a particular case where a minister was brought up on charges for the denial of, again, a cardinal Christian doctrine, just a basic creedal doctrine. And the presbytery just said, no charges will be brought against him. And so finally, in the early 1970s, it was determined, okay, we have to break. And I don't think anybody, so far as I am aware and from what I've read, was really excited and joyful about splitting with the PCUS. All the people who were, done with the PCUS before 1973 had already left and joined the OPC, which was the Northern Presbyterian Church. Had just more or less left altogether and, forget this, and moved on. And so it was done with great heartache. But eventually on December 5th, 1973, in Birmingham, Alabama, at Briarwood Presbyterian Church, the first General Assembly was called for what would become the Presbyterian Church in America. And the whole kind of crux of this new denomination was, first and foremost, they wanted a new mainline denomination. In the founders of the PCA's mind, the old PCUS had left the faith. If you're in a denomination where ministers cannot be held accountable to the subscribed standards, the core Christian tenets of the faith even, then this is a denomination that has run off the rails, so they would think. And so there was a need for a new mainline denomination, a mainline conservative denomination. And they wrote, particular, in the kind of authoritative biography, if you will, of the PCA, Dr. Sean Michael Lucas's work for a continuing church, this development of a new denomination for the continuing church. They wanted this continued mainline Presbyterian denomination, but one that still believed the Bible.
Define mainline.
Yeah. A mainline church is really that is the broad denominational structure, not a schismatic group, a group that splits off because of niche doctrines, but a big tent, broad denomination that still affirms, the heritage of whatever it belongs to. And so mainline denominations would be things like the United Methodist Church, the PCUSA would be a mainline denomination. The American Baptist Association would be a mainline denomination. And so kind of that big tent, mainline Presbyterian church, but that's conservative. And so there were really three distinctives. They said, here's what we're going for as this big tent mainline conservative denomination, Presbyterian denomination. Here's what we want. We want to be faithful to the scriptures. A commitment to chapter 1 of the Westminster Standards, the belief in an inerrant, infallible, and inspired word of God. We want to be faithful to the scriptures as a denomination, a Bible-believing Presbyterian denomination. Second distinctive, we want to be true to the Reformed faith. A lot of the things that they were experiencing were, one, in the old PCUS, there was a weakening, not only commitment to the truthfulness of Scripture, but really a weakening for the Reformed faith. It seemed like to them that the standards were an afterthought. And they said, we're not interested in that. We're Presbyterian by conviction, which means we hold to the Westminster Standards. And if you don't, then go to a different denomination, quit playing games. So faithful to the scriptures, true to the Reformed faith, but lastly, obedient to the Great Commission. And those were the three distinctives, and those are still the commitments. You hear them every year at GA. Who are we as the Presbyterian Church in America? Well, we're faithful to the Scriptures, we're true to the Reformed faith, and we're obedient to the Great Commission. That's what we're here to do as this new mainline conservative denomination. So what that also means as kind of the mainline is it's purposefully big tent. One thing that you'll experience in the PCA that I think is beautiful is there is a spectrum of, and a different flavor, even sometimes a different sort of quote unquote church culture within this broader big tent, broad umbrella denomination called the PCA. There are some that we could call truly reformed or thoroughly reformed. We call them the TR guys. The TR guys, thoroughly reformed, truly reformed guys, tend to have more of a traditionalist mindset. In wonderful, big, beautiful churches that still fit into, distinctives of faithful to the scriptures, true to the Reformed faith, obedient to the Great Commission. Certain hallmarks of this would be churches like First Pres Jackson. Wonderful church, beautiful church.
Big, tall building.
Yes.
Pastor wears robes, choral music.
Yes.
Anything I'm missing in terms of probably where you're
still
going?
past the plates, wearing white gloves. required that all ministers each Lord's Day wear a bow tie. That's a joke, not actually, but that's the TR clerical collar is the bow tie. I do like a good bow tie.
A seersucker suit,
a nice seersucker suit, that sort of thing, which is great, and that fits in the PCA. That's a wonderful thing, and that's sort of one side of the spectrum of what does a sort of worship service look like, and you go, that's great, that's Presbyterian, we can belong to the same. And then maybe on the other side, you've got your TR, thoroughly reformed, truly reformed group. And then you've got on the other side, maybe your quote unquote, more broadly evangelical Presbyterian. So you're still committed to the Westminster Standards, the Reformed faith. But the flavor just looks different. Kind of famous churches that fit this, even within our own presbytery, is Christ Community Church under the leadership at the time of Scotty Smith. It had sort of this kind of more broadly evangelical. There's guitar, there's drums. It's much less formal. He was known and still is known. Scotty's still alive. Of preaching in like jeans and Birkenstocks. Always the Birkenstocks. It was just kind of his thing. Some would even call, Redeemer Presbyterian Church, New York, under Tim Keller's leadership, is that more broadly evangelical sort of flavor. And both of those churches, where the pastor wearing jeans and having a little less formality, still both equally subscribing to the Westminster Standards, the Reformed faith, faithful to the Scriptures, obedient to the Great Commission. Being able to have both of those things fit under that broad umbrella was the goal, and I think still is one of the virtues, in fact, of this denomination. There's a lot of different flavors within the PCA, and I love that. And so it starts in 1973, and that was its intention from the very beginning. It had old Presbyterian churches with that sort of more traditional flavor early on, and then they had others very early on, like the New Life Presbyterian churches, started by a guy named Jack Miller, which were more broadly evangelical and highly influential. That Jack Miller was originally in the OPC. They came into the PCA. But anyway, both of those things, even early on. Then in 1982, this is kind of the thing that we see time and again, there were so many splits from a variety of denominations in the 20th century in Presbyterianism. In 1982, another conservative Bible-believing Presbyterian denomination called the RPCES, the Reformed Presbyterian Church Evangelical Synod. It's a mouthful. Which was a fairly substantial denomination, joined and was received into the PCA. The OPC, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, that northern denomination, was also invited a number of different times. It has never quite worked out, so the OPC is still their own thing, and the PCA is different. But again, it's still that idea of the PCA as this new mainline, big tent, broad umbrella, conservative Presbyterian denomination. The PCA today, again, I still think and hope and pray that we're committed to our distinctives. It is one of the few denominations that has actually seen steady growth since its founding. If you look, this gets brought up every year at our kind of national gathering, General Assembly, that in almost every other denomination, there's decline in both churches and church membership. But the PCA has consistently, year after year, not exponentially grown, but steadily grown. And so there's steady growth within the PCA. It's a denomination that's committed to planting churches, which I'm thrilled with. And so far as I know, within a broad association of Reformed churches in North America, the PCA is honestly by a fairly substantial margin the largest conservative Reformed denomination in America by a substantial margin. So that's really the PCA.
Yeah, I mean, we talked last week about how we are both Reformed and Presbyterian by conviction, right? We didn't, neither of us grew up in this.
Right.
And for me, those three distinctives, faithful to the scriptures, true to the Reformed faith, obedient to the Great Commission, and the fact that there is such a broad spectrum of what that looks like, which is, to your point, not related to those distinctives, right? Like you can hold the Westminster Confession of Faith and also sing, whatever the latest praise chorus is, whatever Chris Tomlin song you want to sing on a Sunday morning. And so that breadth, while also holding fast to those distinctives, is really what appeals to me in the PCA. Yeah. And why I'm part of the PCA as opposed to pick your other Presbyterian denomination. Also because there are no other Reformed Presbyterian denominations in Columbia. But
fair enough.
It's also why I love this church as much as I do, and why we're not looking somewhere else to go to church, because it and I think we as a church probably fall pretty squarely in the middle of that spectrum of thoroughly Reformed, broadly evangelical, kind of in the middle, and there's space for that. While also holding fast to the gospel. That's really amazing.
I do think, in the grand scheme of things, one of the beauties, particularly of Zion Pres, and I don't want to talk too much about Zion Pres because that's for the next episode, but one of the beauties of it is I love the PCA. I just love it. I think it's just an incredible denomination. I love that it's big tent as it is, but with those distinctives and those kind of strong commitments. But case in point, the two churches we went to in Jackson, Mississippi,
couldn't have been more different.
Couldn't have been more different. Both were in the PCA, and firmly in the PCA. I went to this little, very traditional, old school Southern Presbyterian PCA church in Jackson, called Pine Haven Presbyterian Church. If any of you are watching, I love you. You're wonderful. Shout out. And it was just had a very traditional flavor, and it was just precious. I mean, it was, if you've ever read Eudora Welty work, who was a famous writer and Southern writer in Jackson, Mississippi, like that's exactly the church that, like, I can't get Pine Haven out of my mind when I'm reading Eudora Welty. And you went to another church, and if I hadn't have gone to Pine Haven, I probably would have gone to the church that Seth went to.
Which is about as opposite as you can get. So I bounced around a little bit. I actually did spend some time at First Pres Jackson because I was without a car, and it was right around the corner from our from the college I went to, also across the street from Eudora Welty's house. To your point, and landed at Redeemer Jackson for most of my time there, which is predominantly Black. So the music on any given Sunday morning, it can range from an Indelible Grace hymn to an African spiritual to song sung in Spanish. A thriving arts community. Just absolutely, totally the opposite in a lot of ways.
Totally the opposite.
But very, very lively.
Yes.
Very exciting.
And also, anybody from Redeemer Pres Jackson, we love you. We see you. Shout out to y'all. Hearts to y'all guys. Y'all are doing great work. And like both of those exist. One, which is just awesome. I love that. They exist in the same denomination, which is amazing, and in the same presbytery in the same town. And there's something about it. I'm like, golly, I just love that. And to that note, I think if you take those is like the spectrums. Zion Church is like
Pretty firmly in the middle.
pretty firmly in the middle. We have almost Calvin's exact liturgy from Geneva in the 1500s, but we do occasionally sing like a City of Light tune, and a hymn or a praise chorus that was written in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And we don't wear robes in the pulpit, but we preach from a pulpit that's over 100 years old, and so both of those things, it just makes for just, I think, a really, really sweet, combination of being both rooted and relevant, of rooted, but culturally aware, and you combine that with the robust theology of the Reformed tradition under the oversight of a Presbyterian polity, and I think you've just got like a,
Yep. Chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss. Man, that's a sweet spot.
Yep.
Right there. So, all that to say, I love my denomination. I obviously think it's the best, or I wouldn't be here. It's a lot of trouble to become a PCA pastor, let me tell you. And if I wasn't like a big fan, I wouldn't be here. But I am, and I think we belong to an incredible denomination, and I love our history, and I'm excited for its future. And that's the PCA. Yeah.
Well, next time we will discuss more specifically the church where we're sitting right now.
Right now.
But in the meantime, if you have questions, you can leave them on YouTube or Spotify, or you can email keaton.paul at pcazion.org, and we will do our best to answer them. Keaton will do his best to answer them.
Yes.
I will do my best to ask them in a format that can be seen. And so until next time.
Until next time.